So I believe that we need officials that are elected officials that are actually addressing the wills of the people that they're of the citizens in their district. Specifically in this district, we have a governor who has a 70% rate of people being happy with him. We also have in the last few cycles, we've had abortion rights and whatnot on the ballot that Kenton County's, and specifically my district, has overwhelmingly voted against. And we have candidates both elected in the state Senate as well as the state representative that are not listening to the will of the people. And I have deep roots in this community. I was raised in Edgewood. I was born in Fort Wright, and I have an office in Covington. I was a public defender for 17 years, and I have a law office in Covington. So I have a very good understanding of the community around me. I have an understanding of all of the issues of the people around me and the values of this district. So that's how I think I'll make the lives better of this district.
Well, I think I've already shown that in my first, 2 sessions, my first term, which I'm about to finish up. And specifically with this last session, we were able to bring back quite a bit of money for not only the 65th district, but also for Northern Kentucky. So I've spent the last 2 years really working hard on forming good relationships with my colleagues in the House and the Senate, with leadership, and with my local officials at home, so that when issues come up, whether it's on legislation or if it's about the budget, I can work with everyone to get what we need. And I think an example of that was for the old IRS Center, and I worked with Mayor Meyer, and I worked with Ron Washington, the mayor-elect, and our judge executive to make sure that Covington got the $10 million for that site so they could start to prepare that for the developers. And I was really excited that we were able to do that. We were able to work with leadership to get the money allocated for Children's Home of Northern Kentucky. So they were able to receive $6 million. And these were projects that during the interim, I was able to bring legislators, our chair of A&R from the House side, to Covington and tour different facilities, which I think went to forming relationships and made it a whole lot easier when I made an ask that they could visualize what it was that I was asking for. I think it's more of the same. It'll be short session when we go back, supposedly cleanup session. But I've already got one bill that we heard in committee during the interim. I think it was last Friday in Judiciary, and it has to do with domestic violence and coercive control. So a lot of legislation I have really kept kind of in my wheelhouse in my domestic relations practice, but also like to collaborate with other people on good bills. So I would think more of that in the priorities. And it looks like our first vote could also be to reduce the income tax again, based on news that came out, I think, last week. And so more of the same, just keep building those relationships and taking care of my constituents.
So I think as far as priorities, I think one of the things is kind of what I touched on initially, is one of the things that we really need to focus on is we need to focus on transparency and accountability. As a public defender, specifically someone that's done criminal defense work and trial work for most of my career, I get frustrated. I've been frustrated with the amount of lack of transparency and accountability in the system. So one of the big things I think from my perspective is any bill that we consider to vote on needs to have a pretty good understanding. We have to have kind of advance notice. They can't be dropped upon us. We have to have a financial statement attached to it and time for us to look at it. So that's going to be my big priority, is restoring some of that to there so we can start coming up with policies that are best for the district in Kentucky. And so we have an opportunity to read it and everybody can kind of weigh in on it. So I think regarding our certificate of need, I think it's, to most people, the certificate of need is a law that protects the dominant healthcare system from competition. Most of those were created before our modern healthcare system. When they were created, the federal government reimbursed the hospitals for their actual expenses, but now providers are reimbursed on a fee-for-service basis, which means the government payors reimburse providers based upon a set fee schedule, regardless of the provider's actual expense. So I think in that respect, the cost savings aspect of these have significantly changed as the prices are negotiated between the provider and the healthcare company. As our modern system has evolved and the actual cost has become less transparent, these laws have largely also become less transparent. In my opinion, two primary roles expected of the government is accountability and transparency. And those are two of my biggest issues with certificate of need laws. They are laws that promote less transparency in an industry that is actually not very transparent. This in turn erodes accountability. Many certificate of need laws in states generally only apply to certain medical disciplines, such as Ohio, where it only applies in nursing homes. Kentucky's certificate of need law, on the other hand, applies to 32 different services and technologies, which is one of the most far-reaching laws. Studies have shown that certificate of need laws reduce healthcare access, lower quality of care, and also increase costs. And I think at the very least, we need to increase transparency of our own law so we can see whether our law is reducing healthcare access, lowering quality, and increasing cost.
You know, we had the workforce or the task force that was in place. I think we need more discussion on it. It feels like it's a Northern Kentucky issue. I don't know that I've completely made up my mind yet. I know I took a no vote at the end of last session on standalone birth centers. That has more to do with, I think there's more work to do on the bill. I don't know that is completely reflective of where I may end up on that issue, but have concerns about, making sure we have doctors in place or close to a hospital and things like that. But on certificate of need, I think it's a complicated issue and it's not as easy as what everybody thinks. And from what I understand, I think there's concessions that could be made on both sides. So I would like to hear more and from both sides on it before I land on one way or the other. Well, I think for Amendment 2, I mean, so me personally, I will be voting yes. So that's my vote when I go in and vote. I voted yes to put this on the ballot for a couple of reasons. I wanted the voters to be able to vote for this and be able to put this issue to bed once and for all. Before I came in to the House, they had already voted on school choice, and then there was the lawsuit, and the Supreme Court said you've got to go back and it's got to be a constitutional amendment. And I think the voters should decide. I don't know that I should be the one making that decision for my constituents. So I personally believe that options, I think the word choice now has a negative connotation to it, but I think that everyone should have different options for their children based upon what's right for them. And we're so fortunate in Northern Kentucky. You can drive down Dixie Highway and you hit all sorts of great independent schools, public schools, Catholic schools. We have Christian schools. So I know in my district, we have lots of options. I would want that for every child to be able to have those options. So personally, I will be voting yes on that.
So on Amendment 2, I think when we discuss this issue, I think we need to realize that this isn't some theoretical issue. This is about a broadside criticism on teachers who are part of our families and who we all invite in our homes for meals during the holidays. According to the proponents of this amendment, our schools are broken beyond repair, largely because of the teachers and administrations who are our brothers, fathers, mothers, sisters, and friends. And the fact of the matter is that most of the schools in Kentucky are doing very good at educating our children, but they're forced to do more with less each year. We need to support our schools by ensuring their focus is to educate our children. We do that by empowering and supporting our teachers. Support comes in various forms, including ensuring they are properly funded and that they can do their job without fear of firing, lawsuits, or criminal charges. Defunding public schools, like any other issue the GOP are prioritized next term, seems less focused on providing solutions and more so enacting their extremely repressive policies. I think one of the concerns when I've been knocking on doors of people in my district, one of the concerns with the amendment 2 is that no one has an understanding of exactly what's going to happen once they get the permission to change it. And I think from my perspective, if that's happening, one of the things that I can do is make sure that the process, that there's as much accountability and as much transparency on it, and making sure that anything that happens that's passed, we have an understanding of why that's happening and what's happening and where that money's going, so we can make sure, to do everything we can to minimize what I believe is going to be really bad for the public schools.
Well, I think that's kind of like the certificate of need. I think everybody thinks that sounds like an easy thing to do and it's a quick fix. If it passes, I don't know that we necessarily will see something come out of the next session. I think this is something that's more long-term, and I could see them doing. I don't sit on education, so I don't know what those discussions, have been. But I would think that they would want to put a pilot project in somewhere, and I think that's what they talked about the last time. I think Northern Kentucky was slotted to be part of the pilot project. Uh, but, obviously, I don't sit on that committee, but any input that I was asked for, I would work with them on. Um, but I think it's a bigger ask when you talk about funding and is it time to relook at the SEEK formula? And I think that this year, this budget session was great for education. I heard from my superintendent that it was the best budget that he had seen. And what I want to remind people is, I'm not the teacher's boss. That comes from their local school boards. And so is it time to relook at how education is funded? Maybe it is, but I don't think it's something we're going to get done in a 30-day session. Well, I think that's a really personal question for everyone, and I think it's one that can be faith-based. I think it's one that may evolve where you are at a certain time in your life and your life experiences. I have not seen a draft of any legislation during the interim on what that would look like. So I would wait until I saw what that piece of legislation looked like. And I don't know that we will see that in the 30-day. So again, personal to everybody. And I would really want to wait and see what that piece of legislation looked like.
Well, see, it's actually interesting that this is even mentioned as an issue, because the Kentucky General Assembly passed a trigger law in 2019, which banned abortion in Kentucky, which there's no exceptions for race, rape, incest, or health of the mother. In 2022, the supermajority wanted to take a woman's right to choose away from her forever by attempting to amend the Constitution. Kenton County spoke loudly and opposed it. Despite this support to protect women's right to choose, the current elected officials are blindly following the Republican supermajority, and their goal is to ensure the choice of whether and when to bear children continue to be dictated by them. This choice is between the mother, her doctor, and anyone else she chooses to include. We trust women to be our doctors, teachers, lawyers, healthcare workers. We need to trust them to also decide when and whether. So a constitutional pardon power. So this is why having a supermajority is so dangerous. Kentucky has a lot of challenges we are facing. In the past few terms, the GOP supermajority spent an unreasonable amount of time limiting this governor's power. They have, and sometimes successfully, limited the governor's ability to nominate a person for an open U.S. Senate seat. They've limited his ability to call a state of emergency and now his pardon power. I believe that we should look at whether any executive, either state or federal level, should have unfettered pardon power. But this is one of the many limitations this General Assembly has placed on this governor. Some of them are political decisions, but some specifically with his ability to call a state of emergency is very dangerous, short-sighted, and will only hurt Kentuckians who happen to be victims of an emergency while the General Assembly is out of session. However, all of these taken together is troubling because it appears these bills are filed because the supermajority happens to disagree with the governor, who has roughly 70% popularity in the state.
Because I don't think that it's ready yet. It doesn't mean it's not going to pass. It just means that personally, when I've looked at it, I don't know that we've thought it out. So I want to be real careful on anything that I say that I'm going to support, because I really want to look at that piece of legislation. The other thing that I do, and I feel how I've approached this job, is I represent 44,000 people. And as much as I've got my personal views, I read every email that I get. I answer those emails myself. I will go to coffee. I will meet people. So I want to hear from my constituents, because that's my job, is representing the 65th district. I wasn't voted to go down there and take votes on what my beliefs were. So that's how I've approached the job. So I think it's a combination. I'd need to see the legislation, and I'd want to talk to my constituents about it. Well, given what's happened, I think again, just in the past, week, we saw what happened at the University of Kentucky. We're seeing what some businesses are doing. I don't know that it's anything that we may need to address. I know there was at least two pieces of legislation last session that, on each side, that was going back and forth. I don't know that we're going to see that again. So I think right now I want to see if things correct themselves, given where we're at. So I don't know that that we need to interfere if right now they're correcting and making changes in their own programs.
So many of the DEI policies originated from the civil rights initiatives that were originally passed in the 1960s. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed discrimination based on race, color, sex, and national origin. Then the federal government passed the Equal Opportunities Act of 1972, which created the EEOC. Because of the 1964 Act, Congress also passed the Pregnancy Discrimination Act and the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009. These bills thrust our country forward by ensuring discrimination is no longer as big of a barrier for people to get ahead. So the federal government, state governments, schools, including universities, as well as companies, created policies to ensure they were complying with these laws as they were passed. In the past decade, we've seen a significant erosion of the Voting Rights Act, LGBT protections, a woman's right to choose, and affirmative action. Some judges have opined we should re-examine whether women should have a right to contraception and we should have the right to same-sex marriage. DEI is simply a concrete framework for our society to implement the protections put in place by this watershed legislation and allows us to progress. The people shaping this discussion need to be more responsible when talking about this by defining what we're talking about, rather than using terms created by people with specificity. So the price of housing is largely dictated by the market, which is supply and demand. But there are other factors such as location of the home, condition of the home, school district, and zoning that influence price, most of which can be influenced by policy. We can't ignore that one of the biggest issues we have on a ballot is whether we should be funneling public money out of public schools. Taking money out of public schools will make housing more expensive because school districts will be less important because people with means will be able to create a school based upon something other than location. Another factor is zoning. There have been multiple studies that examine this, and the overwhelming conclusion is that our zoning laws favor single-family homes, which are more expensive and make it harder to have different types of housing, which impedes more affordable housing. From a policy perspective, we need to look at whether single-family use only zones, zoning restrictions make it harder for a community to create affordable housing. In the coming decades, Northern Kentucky is in need of more affordable housing at a lower price point and less single-family homes with a higher price point. I think we also need to look at the relationship between the cost of a builder to build the home and the cost of the home buyer. We need to encourage builders to use multiple materials and new materials to build strong, safe homes as affordably as possible. We can also look to tax credit to home builders who commit to building affordable housing, or to give tax credits for a family who buys a home, maintains a steady mortgage payments to make it easier for them to buy and maintain a home.
So the word now is income aligned housing. And I know that I'll be presenting in front of the task force in October about our needs in Northern Kentucky. And as a mom of young adults, I see that as an issue on that type of housing for young adults, low income housing. I mean, we just have a shortage, period. How do we address it? I think that's what the task force is there for. And our ad district did their study that has come back on what our needs are. I think there's all sorts of things we can look at. We've got, we can look at zoning, we can look at what the cities are doing. I think it's going to be, you know, all of us coming together to try to come up with creative solutions. I don't know that the legislature is going to be able to do anything other than identify what the needs are, but I think it's something we need to work on locally to keep our talent here.
I know
Yes,
we sort of addressed this earlier, but
yes, I do. I do. And you know, I understand. I read the posts, I read the Twitters about, you know, where we're taxing now, you know, when you get a massage or if you're taking your dog to the vet. But what we've done is we're allowing people to make those choices of where they're going to pay their tax. And so I do support that zero tax, income tax. I think it's going to be attractive to people coming to Kentucky. Our bordering states have done it, and we don't want to lose our talent and to these states. I think there's some other things. I know yesterday when I was in committee, there are some issues with our military and their retirement being taxed. So I think there's other things that we also are going to need to look at for keeping our people here in Kentucky. But yes, I support that as long as we're meeting those criteria, which we have, and I assume that'll be one of the first votes that we take is to reduce that.
I think when we're looking at income taxes, we need to look at it as a general, a big statewide policy. And a responsible state tax policy has two sides, revenue and spending. On the revenue side, you have income taxes, sales taxes, use tax, and then locally you have payroll and property taxes. On the other side, you have spending. Cutting spending the way some people want to would result in less funding and sometimes no funding for roads, bridges, schools, parks, and other services that citizens expect and rely on. This was done a few years ago in Kansas. Governor Sam Brownback ran a campaign of deep spending cuts that, when enacted, drove the state's budget into the ground. This required Kansas legislature to reverse the tax cuts for which he campaigned. So when politicians are trumpeting zero income tax, they need to state which program, which road, which school, which bridge, which park will be shut down. If they aren't willing to commit to what they would cut, they need to state which tax they are willing to raise to make up for the shortfall. It is irresponsible tax and revenue policy to just cut income taxes. We need to also talk about what other taxes would be raised. Politicians are often looking for short-term results, specifically how this affects the next election. Cutting the income tax to zero will have short and long-term consequences that a politician may not be around to clean up. We can look to the pension crisis to see how making short-term political decisions can have decades-long bad consequences that a completely different General Assembly must fix. Reduction of the income tax needs to be part of a larger revenue and spending policy, which looks at everything, not just income taxes. Yeah, I think this election is about three things: accountability, transparency, and standing up to special interests. And we need to ensure that the women have the right to make their own reproductive choices, including whether and when they have children. And the current supermajority voted to take those rights away against the wishes of the voter. The supermajority in our local representatives are talking about, as we discussed, cutting the income tax, but we need to make that as part of a bigger tax policy idea. So I think as far as going forward, my motivating factors of what I'm going to be making decisions on is accountability, transparency, and making sure that the bills that we have are posted as soon as possible. They're not just posted at the last minute, and that any financial impact statement is actually stated on that, because we need to make sure what those decisions are, how to make those decisions as we go forward, because those are the most important things for the community.
You know, the last 2 years, it's been a complete pleasure, honor to represent the 65th district. It's a great time to represent the 65th district because there's so much going on as far as the growth and what we've been able to do. And I've really tried to spend my time in district getting to know my constituents, whether, you know, they're Republicans or Democrats, and sit down to see what's important to everyone here. That's meeting with people in Covington about the 4th Street Bridge project, being part of that aesthetics committee so that we know what that bridge is going to look like. It's about touring the Boys and Girls Club, but it's about taking what's important to the 65th and then being able to take that to Frankfort to share that so that we continue to have this growth in Northern Kentucky that's good for our families. So I really just want to thank everyone that voted for me the last time, and hope that they will send me back to continue to do the good work that we did this last session.